everyone. Welcome to the Energy Realities Podcast. Today, I'm your host. I'm Dr. Tammy Nemeth of the NemethReport.substack.com. And we have with us today Mr. David Blackman, who I believe is in Texas. Hey, David, how you doing?
Yes, I seem to always be in Texas these days. I haven't left the state in a while, but I'm going to this coming week. So I'm looking forward to our trip to Las Vegas for the 4th of July.
Gosh.
It's going to be a lot of fun and get to go to the Hoover Dam and take a picture of the biggest American flag ever made, unfurled across the Hoover Dam. It's going to be terrific. Anyway, I might even do a little gambling.
Gambling? No. And going from the heat of Texas to the heat of Nevada. Wow.
Yeah, we're getting out of the Texas heat to go to Las Vegas. It's brilliant planning on our part.
Well, you can't argue with that one, especially when, Hoover Dam's worth it.
It is.
Worth it. And we have Miss Irina Slav, who's in Bulgaria. Hi, Irina. How are you today?
I'm great, Tammy. Still waiting for that heat wave from Western Europe to reach us. It's hot, but not too hot.
What's hot to you?
Good question. Well, I personally don't feel very, very comfortable above 30, but I just realized 32, 35 is okay if I'm in the shade. And I had to go to town today to pick up my daughter. And I have to say that trees matter. They provide some really nice thick shade where it's pretty livable. So downtown was full of people sitting in the shade. In the sun, not so much. So my comfort level ends around 32.
Okay, fair enough. Because, I think a lot of the heat stuff is relative. It's what you're used to. And Absolutely. In England, because it's cool most of the time, when it gets like above 28, 29, people are flipping out. Oh my gosh, end of the world.
It's not even 30, come on.
I know. It did get pretty hot last week, though, I have to say. Which we're going to talk about, right?
Yeah.
And we have holding the fort, Mr. Stu Turley. Hey, Stu, how you doing?
It's a beautiful day here in Texas. You got to love it.
Is it hot there today?
I love the hot. My wife absolutely hates the hot, and I'm more of a reptile type kind of guy. I could care less what temperature it is, and I prefer being out in the middle of nowhere in the field working in 100-degree heat, and I'm the happiest.
Wow. You are a reptile. My goodness. That's crazy.
Yes, and my husband. He does this as well. Yeah.
I don't understand that. I don't. Maybe you're from the tropics originally or something.
I don't know, but my poor wife, she can't even sweat. And she is like, she's miserable and just laying in the air conditioning. And I'm like, I'm out. I could care less. So.
Okay. So it's interesting that the conversation today is the heat wave in Europe and the UK, or Western Europe, I should say, since it hasn't extended as far as Bulgaria yet. Poor Irina. And it's become this huge talking debate about air conditioning because, a lot of the people in the more northern nations of Europe and the UK, it usually doesn't get hot for very long. It might be a couple weeks or something. We had a bit of a mini heat wave in the UK about a month or so ago. And then last week was quite hot in England. And the debate about air conditioning, I think to me, is the epitome of net zero. It really is representative of all the stuff that we talk about on the Energy Realities podcast, and the hypocrisy and elitism, and the point that they don't want human flourishing. The net zero advocates, they actually are advocating for people to suffer. Yeah. And I have to say, I was in London last week during this heat wave, and I just want to start with a little anecdote because my hotel room had a cooling system, but it was so underpowered it was, I bet it was probably efficiency approved. I could put my hand up there and I could feel some cool air coming out, but it was like not enough to actually cool the room, except for to make it less oppressive, right? And to get to the venue, I took the underground, the subway there, and there was no air conditioning in any of the cars. So it was actually hotter in the cars than on the platform. It was like sweats just dripping down on everybody. And as I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, decline is a choice. And net zero is really about decline, whether it's degrowth or, just not having things that make your lives better. Nothing of net zero actually makes a human life better. It's all about protecting the earth or whatever. And Zero Hedge had a really great article this morning where they listed off all the different people in the UK and Europe who are angry, really, that people want air conditioning. And like there was this French politician who was horrified that people are promoting and advocating for air conditioning. And she's like, this isn't going to stop forest fires. And I'm like, yeah, okay. Really? And then Good Morning Britain, which is a very popular morning show here in the UK, they were debating on whether it was selfish to have air conditioning. So they had a green, right? They had a green activist on one side, and on the other side, they had a young mother. And so the green activist is going on about how this is terrible. It'll raise emissions because of the power that you're using for it, and so on and so forth. Then they turned to the young mother and said, so why do you deserve to have air conditioning?
Oh my God.
Like, really? And the green guy's like, well, we need to have a hierarchy of people. If you're elderly or infirm, okay, maybe you can be allowed. I'm like, who's going to make that decision? What happened to free choice and affording it or whatever? But there's some British councils that if you've installed it, if it's against their net zero targets, they'll pull them out. So some of the London bureaus, the inspectors go around and they actually pull out the air conditioning that houses have put in. So this, and it reminded me, and maybe Irina, you can talk about this, the story about the European Commission, and which to me is representative of net zero and the craziness and elitism and hypocrisy. And maybe I'll go to you first. Can you tell us about what happened at the European Commission last week?
I said, well, political told us all what happened. But first of all, I thought this thing with people, the authorities coming into people's homes and tearing out their air conditioners was a joke, an exaggeration. No. Oh my goodness.
No.
It's
real. And yeah, it just drives me crazy.
It should drive everyone in Britain crazy, because that's like worse than breaking into people's houses to install smart meters. What is happening in Britain anyway? So what happened at the European Commission, as Politico reported, which is important, I think, that Politico reported, because Politico is really pro-EU and pro-transition and pro-everything that we hate for a reason. So apparently this heat wave caused grid problems across Western Europe, and Brussels was not spared. So they had to, power down the AC, the central air conditioning system, but only for the first 7 floors of the building where the commission works. And this happened to be the floors where the lowlifes, the actual working bees, spend their days. But floors 8 to 13, where the commissioners and their staff work, including Madam President on the 13th floor, which I found especially charming, those were working, even though one commissioner or a higher level official complained that the AC was keeping a temperature of 25.7 degrees Celsius, which is really very nice. 25 degrees.
So what is that, about 75 Fahrenheit? Yeah, that's fine.
It's really
It's fine.
pleasant. Yeah. They're so tone deaf that they saw nothing wrong with this, even though Politico quoted a couple of people from the lower floors as calling this feudalism and a disgrace. And I remember a contact in Brussels in the EU system, not sure if they were in the commission, doesn't really matter. So they were telling me that it is indeed a feudal system, and that was a few years ago. Everything gets passed from the highest level down. It is not to be questioned, like the transition narrative is not to be questioned. So in this context, it's not really surprising. I'm sure none of us are surprised that this happened. What is a bit puzzling to me, as usual, is how open they are about it, and they see nothing wrong with this, with literally enforcing double standards.
Yeah.
The lower ranks, the ones who actually do the work, are left to swelter, drink a lot of water, and come to work earlier, really? While the higher ups are fine in having their offices air conditioned, because I'm sure they assume they are too important to suffer. I don't know how this is going to end, but I don't think people are happy. It's just they're probably too hot to do something about it. But it's really a really good example of what the transition is all about. We've talked about this numerous times, that high-ranking government officials are not giving up their private jet transportation to very important climate events. They are not giving up eating meat and dairy in favor of a vegan diet. They are advising that we all do this. And this minister, I'm sorry, this minister you quoted, that was terrified, appalled, some translated. It's the energy I was going to say energy transmission. I'm so sorry. It's the energy transition minister of France. And this woman, I'm afraid, looked unhinged, talking about forest fires and death of animals. Yeah, AC is not going to stop that, but it's not going to make it worse. But then another French politician, I had no idea there's so many crazy people in France. Well, it shouldn't be surprising, really. But no, there was another lady, I think she was from some Paris council or something, Paris official. Deputy mayor of Paris. Well, I'd like to quote her. Dear American journalists and social media influencers, for days some of you have been criticizing and making fun of Paris because the city does not have AC in every room. OMG, this is so rich. As the second largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in the world, you bear a significant amount of responsibility for global warming and the consequences we in France are experiencing. Your cities, which are 90% air conditioned, are not unrelated to this. In other words, Americans, it's your fault that it's 40 degrees in Paris. This is...
Like what? Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
This is not normal.
No, it's not normal.
No, coming from a politician, it's not good. I mean, we're literally in the hands of people. Well, not me, not you, but people in France, people in Germany, people in the UK. They're at the mercy of people with problems, like serious problems.
Well, it reminded me also of the Paris Olympics a couple of years ago, where it was so hot, and they were doing their eco athlete town, whatever, that this is what they're rolling out for all new builds, that supposedly is sustainable cooling and whatever, but not air conditioning. Oh my gosh, no. And it was so sweltering that, it ended up being hierarchical. So if you had the money to bring along your own AC, like the American athletes, it'd be like, okay, you're comfortable and you're competing well. But if you're like from some poor country that doesn't can't bring along their own air conditioning, oh, well, you'll just have to deal with it. But what I found interesting with the one French official is that she kept saying, this isn't adaptation to have air conditioning. Yes, it is.
Yes,
Well, yeah,
it is.
it's the definition of it, right? I mean,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
adaptation and mitigation. And that same French official, what really set me off watching that video is her saying, well, this isn't going to save animals from dying. Never a thought comes into her mind that it might save thousands, literally thousands of elderly and sick people from dying
Yeah.
in their little flats, unair conditioned flats every summer, which the European continent loses tens of thousands every year to those kinds of deaths. I'm old, and it's no secret. Growing up in the 70s, we used to see those stories out of Chicago and Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, all these northern tier cities in the United States who hadn't adopted air conditioning for their high-rise buildings in their publicly, their federal housing buildings. And so every year we would see thousands of people dying in those federal public housing developments that weren't air conditioned because they were in northern cities and public officials, federal government decided, well, we don't need to spend money on air conditioning. They're all air conditioned now, and we don't see those stories anymore. It's the very definition of adaptation and mitigation. Growing up in Texas, when I was a kid in the 1960s, we had, 6 children in our family, and the only places that were air conditioned in our house were the living room and my parents' bedroom. And the rest of us slept under fans at night and kept the windows open, and it was miserable and hot. And now, of course, I haven't lived in an unair conditioned home in 40 years. But the point is that, adaptation for the United States, even to air conditioning, is on a mass level, is a pretty recent phenomenon, really just the last half century. But this is a century-old technology that saves a lot of lives every year in the United States, could save a lot of lives in Europe if the public officials would allow it to. But we're all inflicted, or they're all inflicted with this climate alarm mania, and it prevents them from making rational adaptation decisions like that. This fear about carbon dioxide somehow being a pollutant and a poison. So it's incredibly tiresome, but I mean, this is the choice France has made. It's a choice the UK has made, the voters have made, putting these people in charge of their governments. And the only thing that's going to change any of that is for public attitudes to change. And when that happens, I guess, is anyone's guess. I know the opposition parties are gained ground every year in some of those countries, but none of them manage to break through to lead the governments. And even when they do, you wonder really whether they will move to mass adoption of air conditioning just because of the PR consequences and how fierce the media blowback would be if they did that. So in the United States, one last thing, and then I'll stop. Tammy talked about decline as a decision. It's a conscious decision. We've been through it now twice in the United States in this century with the Obama administration and then the Biden administration. In both instances, the public in the United States fought back and kicked the bastards out of office, and both times elected Trump to change all that. And we've this time, the second Trump presidency has been just an almost complete sea change in energy and environmental policy. And I know that puts the climate alarmists into, a case of the vapors, and they all fade away and clutch their pearls and scream about dying animals. Somehow that kills it. I haven't figured that one out yet, but and forest fires. And so, but forest fires in the United States decline. The frequency and severity of forest fires in the United States, despite all the hysteria you see about it in the media and out in California every year, has declined by over 50% since air conditioning became a thing. So obviously air conditioning is not causing forest fires. Okay. Can we just stop that BS? At least stop that. But anyway, decline's a choice, and some countries are making it. Economic decline is a choice, and yeah, some countries are making it, and it's a right of every country. But you're going to end up with this kind of story. I mean, the last week has been pretty phenomenal out of Europe with this heat wave. I don't know if it's an unprecedented heat wave or not. I'm not familiar enough with the history there, but we have heat waves every year in the United States too, and it's not comfortable. We don't like it either.
I don't think
Well,
it's been 40 in Berlin and Paris in mid-June. Any
Yeah, that seems awful. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting that sometimes those things happen, and maybe it's happened before we've had proper records. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe.
But in modern record keeping, it seems to be something of an anomaly. So who knows? Maybe it has something to do with a larger weather pattern or something. But so, Stu, one of the interesting things that I found was that France is being upset about this, and why are people wanting air conditioning when they have nuclear power? So if they have nuclear power, which is technically emissions free, what difference does it make if they're using air conditioning and whatnot? And so what's your view on the sort of huge story this past week about the air conditioning kerfuffle in Europe and UK?
I think it's quite entertaining, and if Yoda was here, he would say, "Control, you must." It's about the control, and that's all this is net zero. I would like to just bring to the stage this picture. This is the way it used to look in 1976. There's 30 degrees Celsius and 35. And here we are in 2026. Now you see the red hell that is on every single weather forecaster right now. And make no mistake, this is not about weather. What gets me is in the United States, I've been following this guy on X, and he's found all these zombie or ghost weather stations that are reporting high things that don't exist, and he's out documenting these. I've interviewed weather phenomenon people that are finding that there are about only 32 stations that have been manipulated to claim the world is now going to burn up, and it's because they're in the Antarctic, and then they've manipulated the data. One of my biggest stories that went nuts was when the UN admitted that their climate fear-mongering was a lie. Whoa, go figure this out. So when you merge climate fear-mongering with a heat wave, with net zero energy policies, it's about control. This is pretty simple. They're trying to control your pocketbook. They're trying to wave in the next generation of control. In the United States, we have the flock cameras coming in. Oh yeah, these are going to be great. I'll tell you what, seeing the group out of the UK that have been cutting down the cameras, I'm not going to encourage anybody to do it, but it's pretty cool to watch.
What's a flock camera? Define that. I don't know what that is. What is that?
A flock camera is where they're putting up it's a third party, it's a private company that is selling the data for capturing the license plate information. They've got it now set up to data and AI that it's now picking up. Not only it's matching your phones and your Bluetooth car and everything else. So your car, your license plate is being matched to you with your phone. So when you walk into a store, AI is going to pick out that that's you with your phone, and they're illegally tracking you. So even though this discussion is about net zero and climate change, it's about control.
Yeah.
They've had those, they're called number plate readers. And they've had those cameras for some time, ostensibly to pay for the low emission zones around London and various cities. So they'll read your license plate, and depending how old your car is, what its emissions profile is, then you have to pay a fee. And they've extended it out to include Heathrow Airport now. So a lot of people who, like Uber drivers who had older vehicles, or white van companies and so on, they would have to pay this £12 or £14, whatever it is, just to go in that sort of region. So they've had them in the UK for a while. Now they're rolling them out into the United States. I've seen on some of those police channels where they show the camera footage from the police and whatnot, and how it's a great tool for the police. Well, okay.
Yeah.
But it's also can be abused. In any event, to get back on track with the energy aspect,
it's all
one of the
related,
things
Tammy,
that
and I apologize for digressing on that, but it is
that's okay. I know it is
related.
related. When you see the hierarchy of control that's being put in place and whatnot, and net zero, of course, would support those kinds of things, because then it would discourage you from driving and various other stuff. But last week, the grid in the UK, it wasn't just the Western Europe that was in trouble. The UK grid put out an alert on, I think it was Wednesday, where it was almost like a brownout or a blackout. And so the venue that I was at for this conference, they had air conditioning, but it was shut off, or they claimed there was a malfunction, but I think it was turned off to support the grid. But I didn't realize this. Catherine Porter told me that there's a cap to how much electricity the UK can import from France or Europe, which is 1.5 gigawatts. But they needed to call up Brussels and ask for permission to exceed that amount to keep the lights on, to keep the grid stable in the UK. So it ended up going to, I think it was 2.5 or 2.8 gigawatts rather than the 1.5. So I think it's just appalling that the UK would have to go begging to Brussels, please, can we have some more electricity to keep our grid stable? Because it was hot and still. So the wind turbines weren't going, and the solar panels were overheating. So it was like they didn't have enough power, and the natural gas was at capacity, and whatever the hydro was at, and it wasn't enough. And so they had to rely on these interconnectors. So if we're talking about net zero and this push to make everything electric, so imagine what will happen in wintertime once there's no more natural gas heating and it's all electric, and all the cars no longer are petrol or diesel, but they're electric. What's going to happen if in summertime a few people turn on air conditioning, and there's only about 10 or 18% of the population have air conditioning in this country, and that crashes the grid? What's going to happen in winter? So I throw that out to you, Irina. What will happen to a grid in winter if net zero gets its way and everything's electric? Can the grids cope?
Well, there will be blackouts because France will have higher demand as well for heating purposes. And for all its nuclear reactors, their grid, the French grid, was not designed to support the UK grid in addition to the local grid. I'm sorry, I am flabbergasted to an extent by just how self-destructed UK politics has become in these past few years. So they're consciously making themselves extremely reliable on imports of electricity during times of peak demand, which, as you said, will happen again in winter. And they see nothing wrong with this because emissions, but they fail to account for the fact that France will be needing more electricity. And what's with Brussels? Because in addition to the UK going to beg Brussels to let them have a little bit more electricity, France has to go to Brussels to be allowed to supply that electricity to the UK.
Yeah.
That's just nice and very sovereign and independent and democratic and free. And I just like to throw in another anecdotal story about Bulgaria. A couple of years ago, as part of efforts to reduce emissions in Sofia, the government offered to replace a few thousand households fireplaces with, guess what, air conditioners. With air conditioners, because they're more energy efficient and they do not emit because they use electricity. I guess at the time they didn't know that air conditioners are really, really bad for climate change. But
And
I
forest
thought
fires.
it
Yeah.
was really hilarious. Yeah, so I really don't know what's going on in the UK and how people are enduring it. Although they did stage a few protests and nothing happened, so I can understand why they can get a bit desperate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
what's going to happen? So here's what I wonder. The Labor government, and really the Conservative government before the Labor government was moving in the same direction. But now you've got this situation where the UK is dependent on imports for electricity, not just as a substandard grid that's prone to interruptions. So now solar doesn't work when it's cloudy. Solar doesn't work when it's dark. Solar also doesn't work when it's too hot. And now we're finding out solar doesn't really work very well when it's too cold either. And so, solar was it was Ed Miliband's big idea for fortifying the grid. You're going to cover up all the beautiful pastoral farmlands with solar arrays, and that's going to solve everything. Well, it doesn't solve everything. So now Labor has set up a situation where the island nation is dependent on imports of electricity from France and imports, I guess, of gas from Norway to fortify their own power grid. What's going to happen to not just the UK, but also Portugal and apparently Spain when France elects a right-wing government, which is probably going to happen here in the next 2 or 3 election cycles, the way things are going. And that government says, you know what, we're not going to export our electricity anymore because our own grid is now unstable because of all these exports of electricity, all you vassal countries that are taking our electricity away from us. What does the UK do then when that happens? Because you're in a situation where even if the UK should respond to this Labour excess by, say, putting a Reform Party government in place, is the Reform Party really going to have the ability in just a 5-year period, one term, to refortify UK's grid to the extent it can do without those imports? You see what I'm saying? You're setting up a situation where it's kind of self-perpetuating. And it's kind of an evil genius by the Labor government because, you're setting this situation up where it's not going to be really very easy to cure. And you're risking, I guess their belief is that they and parties like them are going to remain in power across Europe from now on. And that may actually turn out to be true, I guess, given the way some things like the recent elections in Romania went. But it's really a hell of a bet to be making with the future of a country that your political philosophy is going to reign forever. And it's a dangerous one, it seems like. And anyway, I don't know. I don't know what point I was trying to make, but it just seems a very risky proposition to be doing that.
So, Stu, you often talk about energy security on the Energy Newsbeat podcast. And what do you make of Europe's energy security when there's all these interconnections and now they're trying to pursue net zero at an accelerating pace? What do you think the state of the grid will be in the next couple of years?
Well, energy security starts at home and energy dominance is displayed through your exports. Ed Miliband does not watch my podcast. I can guarantee you that. That man is absolutely, like I've said, I believe I saw him on a Wallace and Gromit cartoon. He was a sheep in the background. I saw him on there. I swear it was him. But when you sit back and take a look at the UK I believe it was last week or the week before, Ed Miliband just banned. He is banning North Sea oil and gas production again, but yet they buy North Sea oil and gas production from
Norway.
Thank you. This is like you can't buy this kind of stupidity. Grid interconnections are absolutely dependent. Let me give you one other example of a grid interconnection that I found absolutely amazing. $3.8 billion connection to New York City from Canada's hydro. And it's buried under all of these miles. It's one of the deepest, longest runs into New York City. I'm old enough to remember about 6 months ago, Canada threatened to cut off our electricity. Why would you want to have an international grid connection that could shut you off because of a mean presidential tweet? Grid interconnections with other countries are destined to either be sanctioned, cut off, have a tanker thrown out, and have an anchor dragged behind it, and you're destined to not be energy secure. Sorry. I'm kind of like Bulgaria. I would prefer to have a coal plant in my backyard that I can control, and I can watch a bulldozer shove it in. Yes, and I thank you, Jeff. I love Jeff Chestnut. He is a class act, and he is my favorite Muppet. But you sit back and take a look. Energy security, people deserve energy security. People also deserve not to be spied on and controlled. And it's just, the world is full of corrupt politicians right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. Last week in London, it was the conference I was at, but there was also London Climate Week. And of course, all the activists were like, this is just proof of climate change. It's so hot. And they had venues all over. And at the conference I was at, there was a lot of conversations about energy abundance and energy security, and what form that takes, with hydrocarbons and nuclear. And there were protesters outside. And, it was kind of funny. I thought, should I take them some water? Because it's kind of hot out there. But then I thought they would probably be really upset if I offered them a plastic bottle. And but they would protest, and they had a cross to make it seem like they were religious. But what it said was, fossil fuels are crucifying the earth. And it was just really, I think you people are at the wrong place. Maybe you need to go somewhere else. But it's just lost on some people, that the ones who support net zero, who think that the earth is dying or whatever. And it seems to be like this sort of move away from human flourishing, where they care more about animals and whatever, rather than people, which is, what was discussed earlier. But if we could pivot a little bit, because last week was also very interesting with the letter from the United States, Algeria, Nigeria, and Qatar regarding EU's methane rule. Yeah. And Irina had a fantastic piece on this last week. And on the one hand, it was like Europe says, oh, no, we're delaying things until 2029 or 2030. You don't have to do stuff, blah, blah, blah. But it turns out it starts in January 2027. And so this letter sort of identifies this problem and how Qatar doesn't want to have to do it. These countries don't want to have to do it. Irina, can you tell us a little bit more about why this letter from the 4 nations to the EU is important?
Well, it's just the latest notification, if you will, from Qatar and the US that they are not going to do this methane tracking. And they got Algeria and Nigeria to sign it too, because Algeria and Nigeria are not exactly the richest energy exporters in the world. They will have trouble with the additional cost of all this reporting. But the whole story is a bit confusing to me, because it enters into effect next year, but they will not be enforcing penalties if energy suppliers fail to track and report and verify their methane emissions. Okay, fine. And then I see a news report about Venture Global sealing a long-term supply deal with LNG with some German company. So is Venture Global going to comply with this, or is Venture Global, as per usual, going to find a loophole to use? I'm betting on the latter, but that's pure speculation because I don't know the fact. It was just really interesting about this deal because it comes at the same time as this letter from the U.S. Energy Secretary, who is the actual energy industry executive. He knows the industry inside and out, and he says U.S. companies cannot do what you're asking them to do. How is Venture Global closing this long-term supply deal? Because I'm sure they use the same pipeline networks as all the other LNG producers.
Yeah.
How does Venture Global think it's going to swing that? And the other interesting point is about this, what was it? Some methane partnership I mentioned in that story, but I forgot the full name. Methane partnership, which features all the biggest gas companies in the US, all the big oil majors are all there. So they are officially stating they will sign up for methane tracking and reduction. And yet they don't feel comfortable with the EU regulation about methane tracking. What's going on? On the one hand, you're very prepared to track and report and reduce and all this through these partnerships. On the other hand, we don't really like this.
Honestly, we shouldn't have to report to somebody else because then it subjugates you to their will. That's what this is all about. Once the EU starts saying, we want you to report on this, it's kind of like the camel putting his nose under the tent and then to wake up in the morning and the camel's licking your ear. I mean, it's exactly what they're going to do. And the EU will say, oh, we're not going to impose anything. The next lever they're going to pull is taxing. So we don't go ahead. Secretary Chris Wright, I've already filed the paperwork to get him on the show again with David. And this is another big thing. It's not about the methane reporting capabilities or whatever. It can be done. It's about the proposed tax and burden and cap and trade that's going to be coming on. It's the camel nose under the tent that's about to happen. And if you can't realize that, that's exactly what's going to happen. The EU is trying to project monetary wealth onto the United States through other tax. That's exactly what that is.
It can't do it. And the other thing they're not thinking about.
I'm just telling you, you say they can't. I say they shouldn't, but they are going to.
They're going to try for sure. But what they're really not thinking about is that even if some companies like Venture Global, for example, find a way to comply with this regulation, this will make their product more expensive for the European buyers. It's already expensive. It seems like nobody cares about this in Brussels or in national capitals that import LNG. It's a really weird situation. I'm not sure how it will end. But one thing I'm sure about is that the decision makers, the regulators, will realize that, it's going to cost us an arm and a leg. Maybe we should postpone the enforcement indefinitely, because that's what they do. Tammy, they just postpone and delay. It's still there, but we're not going to enforce it because we don't want to go bankrupt so fast.
I think they're waiting for Trump to be done, to be out of there.
This won't change the price of LNG.
Right.
Yeah.
And it won't change the nature of the product either.
Right. So I think on the one hand, it's related to the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which right now has 6 main things that they tax it, but you have to do monitoring, reporting, and verification in order to qualify for whatever, right? So it's really about creating that accounting system. And The methane rule is very similar because you have to have monitoring, reporting, and verification. Now, the interesting thing about the Venture Global one is that they're claiming to have carbon capture on their facility and along their pipeline or whatever, which lowers their emissions, whatever, blah blah blah. And so that's why they sign these deals. But part of the issue in the United States, David, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you have a lot of smaller producers who feed into the pipeline system, which then mingle, and then things get compressed at the station and then sent abroad or whatever. And some of it comes from Canada. So it's like, okay, how are you determining which molecule is from which company and what has been their monitoring, reporting, and verification, which is why they're
all
saying we
about
can't
power and
comply with
control.
this.
It's all about
Right.
power and control.
It's
And
about
to go back to
monitoring.
Arena's
Right again?
question about, about why the companies are saying, well, they don't want to comply with this regulation, but they're going to do it anyway. They're going to clean their stuff up, and they already have. I mean, let's be honest. It goes back to in the United States, all the pipeline companies got together during the George W. Bush administration 25 years ago and created this Energy Star system where they all cleaned up their pipeline leaks and captured all the methane coming out of their facilities, and it worked really well. It didn't work perfect. Nothing's perfect. But it was a voluntary compliance system that was monitored by the government. Standards were set by the government, but it was voluntary compliance, and it worked really well. And that's what they want to do here is say, well, we're going to voluntarily do this, but we don't want to be burdened by your reporting requirements, which are incredibly onerous and expensive and costly, and will, as Irina and Tammy both noted, increase the price of the product supplied to the EU, but will not change the nature of the product at all. It's just a matter of power and control. The bureaucrats want power and control. And what happened in the United States to the Energy Star system is that first Obama came in and decided, well, we've just got to have power and control over this. And so they just passed these enormous onerous regulation reporting requirements that the first Trump administration rescinded, and then Biden put back into place. And now the second Trump administration is rescinding. And so it just goes back and forth. But it's just all about these left-wing politicians, which dominate at the European Commission, to satisfy their constituencies, have to exhibit power and control. And so they're doing it to satisfy their own constituency. It's not going to improve anything. And it's not going to change the nature of the natural gas that's supplied to Europe. It's just going to cost more. And, U.S. companies can bitch and moan about all they want, but if they want to have customers in Europe and these long-term supply agreements with European countries and companies, they're ultimately going to end up having to comply with it one way or another. And, that's just part of the business, and you have to end up accepting it at the end of the day, or just quit doing business in Europe. Which, by the way, is Exxon's approach.
That's a smart approach, I think.
Quite honestly,
like the penalties are really high for non-compliance, and it sounds like if you, it's not just that you monitor it; it's also has to be verified by an EU official. Yeah. So then it's like, okay, well, what mechanism is that? This is extraterritoriality and whatnot, which is kind of bad. But Stu, I'm sorry, I cut you off there. What did you want to add there?
Treat me like a husband. I mean, that was absolutely, that's what I get at home all the time. When you sit back and take a look at this, it's about the control. It's about a monetary wealth transfer mechanism. The EU is nothing more than a leech and a parasite on the European countries. I'm sorry. I think that they are absolutely a horrible institution. And I quite honestly would like to see the UN disbanded. The UN and the EU are two parasitic organizations.
Well, speaking of the UN, China just released a new white paper about how it foresees a new world order. And it's reforming. Like, you don't throw out the UN, we'll just reform it. I'm like, China's been infiltrating the UN for a long time.
Yeah, why not?
Overseeing appointments. Why not? Why not? But back to the methane one. What's interesting with LNG is that Spain yesterday, I think it was, or maybe on Friday, has approached the EU to say, please don't enforce the ban on Russian LNG.
Wow.
We're shocked, right?
Yeah, it's
Shocked!
shocking. Yes.
Oh my
Who
gosh.
could have seen that coming?
Who
Nobody.
could have seen that coming?
It's
Irina,
going to bring up a bigger question, because you have Turkey, who's sitting out in trying to become the international pipeline hub of oil as well as natural gas. And then you have the Sakhalin 2 project. You have Russia with its icebreaker creating the whole new Arctic year round is their goal, is to go around there. I applaud the Russians in trying to go through there. And I think that it displays not only the hypocrisy of von der Leyen is absolutely amazing when you sit back and go, air conditioning for me, but not thee, like we talked about on today's show. Gas for me, but not thee is the same thing. And when you look at the deindustrialization of Europe undergoing right now, look at the cost of gas per pipeline versus gas per LNG. $6 for Russian gas, $15 for LNG. You have Qatar.
wow.
You have 18 LNG terminals. 2 of them are now down. You now have 6 LNG tankers that went into the Persian Gulf, snuck in through the Strait of Hormuz. You have the Strait of Hormuz is going to keep that down there because Iran is going, hey, we don't care. We're going to take, now they've claimed the UAE in the Gulf of Oman, so they can claim that export. You have an entire 18 trains of Qatar is now whether or not it's going to be able to be a supplier without incredibly more expensive $2 million per tanker coming through. And that adds a lot of money to each tanker if they're going to be imposing throughput on that. So the European Union needs to really sit back and think, do we want to industrialize, or do we want to steal from everybody and have a wealth transfer? That's going to be the choice.
Well, I think
Okay.
for the EU itself, the EC, the choice has already been made to deindustrialize. I mean, that's just a conscious choice of those people in Brussels, and apparently in the UK as well right now. And so, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, but I think the choice has been made already.
Yep.
What's interesting is that a bunch of the businesses in some of the countries have said, look, we need to kind of slow down on the carbon border adjustment mechanism because it's adding these costs and it's making it harder for SMEs and whatnot. However, the EC, I guess, has decided it's going to expand it to a bunch of other smaller goods or items or whatever. So it on the one hand, it's like they don't like their own people. And that, like I said at the outset, decline is a choice. But at what point do the citizens of the EU and the UK say, enough of this, stop treating us like we don't matter, that, that we aren't worth it, that you have to ration these different things, that you're going to tell us how to farm? Because last week the UK put out its agricultural policy, I guess, where they want to tell farmers to stop raising cattle and switch to oil seeds and lentils.
Oh my goodness.
Which, like, seriously? So, you get these people in charge who want to tell everybody what to do, which goes back to this argument about control, which is seen most clearly in what has happened with this heat wave, which really put it under the microscope. It's like now suddenly you have to justify why you want to be comfortable. Like, how dare you? You should be just suffering through, enduring the heat or something like that. So as we wrap up, I'm going to go around the horn, give your thoughts and comments of what we talked about today. Irina, I start with you.
Well, I think that to the question of when the people of Europe, the peoples of Europe are going to wake up. I think in the East, they're very awake. They're having none of that. But these reports from France and Germany, suggest that these people may be lost to a great extent. I just saw that the German government is actually doing a campaign against air conditioners, telling people they're bad and why they're bad, while there are hospitals with no air conditioning. And what sort of insanity is this in a first world country?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know about France and Germany, really, or the UK. But I think there's still hope, because after all, what the people at the European Commission might be forgetting is that some governments, especially in Eastern Europe, Central Europe and Eastern Europe, like Poland or Slovakia and Czechia, they do care about what their voters think. And they will not be enforcing centrally dropped energy policies that do not sit well with the voters, because then they will be voted out. The people at the Commission don't care because they don't get elected. They get appointed. So why care? But the people who do get elected do care. Unfortunately, in the West, the voters seem to be pretty well brainwashed, so it's not as dangerous. But even there is the danger of the so-called far right in France and the AfD in Germany. So I don't know how it will go, but you take away people's basic comforts, they will remember it, because they'll be traumatized, even temporarily, but they will remember it. And maybe at the next elections, they will make a different decision from their previous one. I mean, we can hope. Protests don't seem to work. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's hard in some cases because there's so many different parties that the votes all get split. And the left
just don't vote for the incumbents. That has been my principle for years.
David, what's your last thoughts on this?
Well, I just very quickly, I think for me, it all boils down to something I repeat a lot, unfortunately, for my readers on Substack, is that we can't, as a human race, control the climate by, raising or lowering the amount of carbon dioxide, plant food in the atmosphere, which is the basis for all life on the planet Earth. The climate is changing. We can either adapt and mitigate to it or perish. I mean, that's the way it's going to be. And air conditioning, among all technologies, may be the prime example of the human race adopting and mitigating. And so this whole argument is just about one culture in the United States that has mass adopted that technology, and Europe, which has made the choice not to. And now they're having a heat wave and everybody's hot. A lot of people are dying as a result. So you can either want to save human lives and encourage human flourishing or not. And those are the societal choices we see, the dichotomy that we see right now between the European Commission and the government of the United States. So that's it.
Okay. That's a great point. It's a choice. And what's interesting is that these are first world countries. They have the money to do it if they wanted, and they're choosing not to.
Right.
Stu, your final thoughts.
Are they wasting their money on other things?
Oh, big time. Huge trillions of dollars.
Yeah.
There's a couple things about grid resiliency that net zero is crushing. And that is, grids require fiscal responsibility and obeying the laws of physics. And both of those are being abused by net zero. You take a 60 hertz system that is AC, and in the European Union, in UK, it is a 50 hertz system. You try to slap a DC system on it, you have to have all the extra expenses. Becomes fiscally irresponsible at that point. What happens? Prices go up. So the grid could care less. It is an inhuman fiscal responsibility that will sit there and go. So if the grid was Yoda, it would say, stupid you are. So I'm going to just sit back and say, hey, Yoda's right a lot. And the grid does not care about whether or not you're hot or cold. The grid just wants to have fiscal responsibility and obey the laws of physics. And if the European Union and the UK don't want to do that, you're going to have the same thing that Obama and Biden did that Trump had to clean up. And people are not smart enough in the United States to realize how much President Trump has already cleaned up. But we have a one-party system in the United States, so it's a little hard to get that message across.
Well, that's a good place to end it. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in and your excellent comments. And we'll see you not next week, 2 weeks from now.
2 weeks.
Yeah, taking next week off for the 250th. And by the way, I think it's going to be kind of fun. We're going to have, I believe on the 4th, we're going to have the United States play the UK in Philadelphia in football. I think that's going to be a game to watch.
Holy smokes. Okay.
Whoa. You mean England?
Yeah, thank you.
England.
Because every nation has their own team.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it'd be great fun. England in Philadelphia on the 4th, I think, is what I saw. That would be actually a hoot. So
wow.
Let's have
You're
some
gonna
fun.
make the Scots mad by saying the UK student. It's never a good idea to piss off the Scots.
No, because they will absolutely drink you blind. I mean, that is absolutely the way to go. Have a great day. See you.
Bye, everybody.